Due to their importance, let's review what base tables do and the navigations of GeneXus objects for smart devices. Here is an example where from a panel for smart devices, Ask Country, we select a country through a dynamic combo box, Uruguay for instance. And then we call another panel for smart devices, which will show the name of that country and all the speakers from that country grouped by session. In addition, we're shown a button to view information about the country, calling the detail of the corresponding work with component. The application bar offers a button to add a new speaker of that country. For each speaker included in the list grouped by session, we will be able to view the details of this session. Here we see that only the speaker is displayed, on the right, instead of these other two speakers because they belong to another country, USA in both cases. This panel will be composed of a fixed part containing the name of the country, the button to view it, and the Add button in the application bar to add a new speaker. On the other hand, there will be a variable part corresponding to the grid. This grid will be similar to the grid of the Work With speakers list. Note that tapping on it displays part of the speaker's resume as we've shown before. Tapping on this blue arrow shows the speaker's details. There will be some differences, such as this button, and the fact that its base table will no longer be the speaker's base table. Instead, the base table will now be that of the speakers associated with the sessions. Let's see it in GeneXus. Here is the first panel, Ask Country, which asks the user to enter a country. There's a country variable that we've defined based on the country ID attribute, and to which we've changed its control type so that it's a dynamic combo box whose values are taken from country ID and whose descriptions correspond to the country name attribute. Next, we have this button, which invokes the other panel for smart devices to which we're sending this country ID. The panel is this one. If we open the rules, we can see that it receives that value through a parameter in the country ID attribute. We open the layout, and in the fixed part, we see the country name attribute, the view button, which is invoking the Work With device's country level, detail, sending it the country ID in a parameter. On the other hand, the application bar includes the Add button, which uses a speaker variable corresponding to the speaker business component. It assigns it the corresponding country ID, which is received in a parameter, and invokes the details of Work With device's speaker, which sends it this business component in order to initialize the country. We also have the grid that will have its own base table. This is regardless of the base table of the fixed part. Remember that this is a feature of smart device objects. The fixed part and the grid determine independent navigations. Each one will have its base table. This creates an important difference with web panels. For smart devices, remember that the refresh event will navigate the base table of the fixed part. And then the load event will be in charge of navigating the base table corresponding to the grid. Before examining the grid, let's consider how the base table of the fixed part of this panel is determined. The attributes that belong to the fixed part will be taken into account, in this case, only country name. as well as all the attributes that belong to the events associated with the fixed part, which in this case, view and add, which are placed outside a for each command. Therefore, in this case, the country ID attribute and the other one here, also country ID, together with the attribute of the fixed part of the layout, will all determine the base table of this fixed part. If we had programmed the refresh event, which we have not done, the attributes displayed there, and that weren't included in a for each command, would also participate in determining the base table of this fixed part. For this reason, the base table will be country. To confirm, let's see the navigation list. If we look for the data provider corresponding to the fixed part, we see that it navigates the country table, keeping the corresponding country received in a parameter. We also need to identify the grid's base table. Of course, the attributes that belong to the grid will participate. In this case, they are speaker image, speaker full name, country name, and those included in the other layout. We don't have any more than that because this and speaker CV mini is a variable. The attributes placed inside the load event outside the for each command. Again, here we have speaker full name and speaker CV mini. The resume is here and here too. In addition, we have the event associated with this image and the event associated with the View Session button with this image loaded. We open the events. The first one, which uses the speaker ID attribute, and the second one that uses the session ID attribute. Note that it first called the detail of work with device's speaker, sending it this speaker. Next, it calls the detail, but this time of work with sessions, sending it the session ID. Therefore, if we look again at the attributes we have, session ID, speaker full name, speaker CV mini, speaker ID, which one will be the base table of this grid? The inclusion of session ID in this event associated with the grid will cause the base table of this grid not to be speaker, but instead session speakers. On top of that, in the base TRN property, we had mentioned that level of the session transaction. In addition, inside the order, to take part in determining the base table of the grid, the session name attribute is displayed because we want to cut the information by session name. Of course, the attributes displayed in the search will also participate, as well as those that could be included in the conditions if they had been programmed. If now we look at the navigation of the data provider corresponding to the grid, we can see that a for each command is run for session speakers and that a filter by country is applied. What country? The country received in a parameter. Remember that the navigations of the fixed part and the grid are independent. Filters between one and the other are not automatically established. What causes the filter by country ID to be applied in the first navigation, that of the fixed part, as well as in the grid, is the parameter received in the country ID attribute, and not the fact that the base tables are related. We see that country is included in the extended table of session speakers. However, this relationship is not considered. Summing up what we saw in the demo, the fixed part and the grid each have their own base table, and the navigations of each one are determined independently. The attributes that will determine the base table of the form are as follows. The attributes included in the fixed part of the layout, in this case country name, The attributes referenced in the General Conditions tab, in this case, none. The attributes displayed in the form's events outside for each commands. That is to say, those of the refresh and events associated with controls of the fixed part of the form, which in this case are the View button and the Add button of the application bar. Therefore, the base table in our case will be country. We insist that, unlike what happened in web panels, here the refresh event will be associated with the navigation of the form's base table. Therefore, it's like the load event, but to navigate another table. Logically, inside the refresh event, the grid's data cannot be accessed. As is always the case when there is an implicit table, the base table, if a for each command is included in these events, a for each command nested in the implicit one will be considered. The attributes that will determine the base table of the grid are as follows: the attributes included in the grid, the attributes referenced in the order, search, advanced search, and conditions of the grid, and those of the conditions general tabs. The attributes displayed in the grid's events outside for each commands, that is to say, those of the load event and other events associated with controls inside the grid, in this case of the view session event and tap on the image in the other layout. If the base TRN property of the grid has been configured, the base table stems from here, but the attributes mentioned earlier must belong to its extended table so that everything is defined correctly. For this reason, in our example, the base table will be session speakers. For the load event, what we've said earlier applies, so the base tables that GeneXus will find are as follows: for the form, country, and for the grid, session speakers. Even if they have an indirect one-to-n relationship, the navigations are independent by default. This means that it's like having a couple of parallel for each commands, not nested. To link navigations, we need to do so explicitly. In this example, thanks to the fact that we receive values in an attribute parameter. Note that since the fixed part must retrieve a single record, for the panel to be correctly designed, we need to be able to filter the corresponding base table, country, to retrieve the desired record. Since we're receiving values through a parameter in the country ID attribute, this will be automatically made. In addition, since the grid navigates the session speakers table, which has country ID in its extended table, the filter will also be applied to this table, and only the sessions corresponding to speakers of that country will be displayed.